Hello. On behalf of the Aberdeen Performing Arts and the festival partners, welcome to Granite Noir. I'm Janet Smith and I programme for the Children in Schools programmes at the Bath, Boswell and Dublin Literary Festivals. So I'm very delighted to be here in Aberdeen, virtual Aberdeen alas, for Granite Noir. And I'm equally delighted to be talking today with one of my favourite authors, M.G. Leonard. And this event is part of the digital staging of Aberdeen's International Crime Writing Festival. Now, I probably don't need to tell a lot of you who are out there that M.G. Leonard is the award-winning author of the Beetle Boy series of books. And now, with Sam Sedgman, she has been writing the Adventure on Trains series. And we're going to be talking about the latest one, Murder on the Safari Star, in a little bit. But M.G. Leonard is also an environmental campaigner, and she's one of the authors who established the hashtag Authors for Oceans series, which is a campaign that works to reduce the amount of plastic that goes into our oceans. She's also vice president of the insect charity Bug Life, which kind of makes her the Kamala Harris of the beetle world. But today, as I said, we're going to be chatting about jewel thieves, kidnapping and murder on the most amazing trains that travel through some of the most beautiful parts of the world. But very importantly, you too can ask questions. So if anything comes up as we're chatting that you really want to know more about, or perhaps you've already got a question that you're dying to ask, then just put it into the chat box and I'll see those as they come up and we can stop and ask them. And if you like, you can pop in your name too, maybe your age and maybe where in the world you might be. But let's get going. And please, everybody out there, join me in giving a very warm welcome to M.G. Leonard. Woo!
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Great, it's so lovely to see you. And where in the world are you?
I'm in Brighton in my study. This is where I write my books and research my books. And for the last year, it's also where I've homeschooled my children. So it's a very learned room.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that must be quite an interesting place for you to have been over this last year, because of course the stories that you have been writing and talking about in this kind of virtual world are very much about being in other parts of the world. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the latest book in the Adventures on Train series, but this is book 3 and we've already had book 1, which took us, this is very pertinent, I think, to where we are, because it does in fact go up the east coast of Scotland and then kind of back down through the middle. So this takes us through the Highlands. And then, of course, this one takes us through California, which feels incredibly exotic considering we're all stuck within 5 kilometers. So tell me a little bit about where the idea for this new series came from and why trains?
Well, so the idea came about quite a long time ago. I was already writing the Beetle Boy books, but my sons were at the time about 8 and I had a really little one, little toddler, and both of them really loved trains. And my oldest son, won't mind me saying this, but he's what you would call a reluctant reader. He really struggles to find books that he actually wants to read. And often he feels, particularly literary books that reference how much the protagonist in the story loves books and loves reading, he doesn't relate to them. He doesn't feel those stories are for him, but he loved trains always. And when he was really little, he loved Thomas the Tank Engine books, and we watched Chuggingtons on the TV, and we built railway tracks around the house, and Lego and Brio and Hornby. And so when it got to the age where he could choose chapter books from the library or the bookshop, he looked for books about trains. but he wanted real trains, not magical troll trains powered by unicorn glitter or anything like that. He wanted mechanical details, he wanted routes, he wanted real life, and he wanted something set now, and he wanted a protagonist that he felt he could relate to. And it didn't exist. And I became quite frustrated at the time. I was a Beetle expert. I was writing Beetle books. And I thought somebody should write books about trains for reluctant readers like my son. But I didn't think that I could do it because I didn't really know anything about trains. I'm not mechanically minded. I'm as you said, very passionate ecologist and interest in insects, but trains, world apart. And then my littlest son grew up and started, again, the Brio, the Lego. We would obsessively watch the trains coming in and out of Brighton Station. And I started to think, when he gets to Arthur's age, there needs to be books about kids having adventures on trains. So at the time, I was still working at the National Theatre. I hadn't become a full-time author. And at the National Theatre, I worked with Sam Sedgman. We were a part of a digital team together. And in fact, I was his boss. And I knew that he liked trains, because behind our desks in the theatre, we had desks and they were up against a wall, and we would put little collages of pictures and things that we loved. And behind his computer, there was a train map of all of the closed down underground stations in London. And he used to regale me with stories of, you know, why they were closed. And we talked about trains a lot. And he used to relate to my children through the medium of trains. And he asked me what I was going to write after the Beetle Boy books. And I said, you know, I've got this idea, but I don't think I can write it. I take my research quite seriously. I don't like to throw a story together. I like all the detail and the incidental information to be factually accurate. And I do like to set them now. And that was when it suddenly occurred to me, like, oh, we could write this together. We'd worked together for about 7 years. We have a very good way of communicating with each other about things that we don't think are working. We don't get upset, or we don't take anything personally. And so I suggested we write them together. And I should say, Sam was already a writer. He wrote plays, and he wrote lots of journalist articles, as well as working in the theatre with me. He wrote a lot of online content. So I knew he was a good writer. And he became very excited by the idea, because not only is he passionate about trains, he's a murder mystery enthusiast, I think is the nice word of saying it. He had a little company where he would stage murder mystery weekends for people, for parties and celebrations. And so suddenly it was like this wonderful moment where I thought, oh, yeah, together we could actually make a really good series that is the kind of books my sons would have loved and do love now to read. And that was the beginning, really, of us having a go to see if it was possible to write a book together, because neither of us had ever done that before. But we worked in theatre, and theatre is a collaborative art form. And when people think that an author produces a book on their own, they're neglecting to realise, you know, the artistry and design and the layout and the proofing and the editing. And there's a whole team of people that work on a book. So yeah, that was how it came about.
Well, I am immediately going to go to an audience question, because it's a question that I also share with Toby, who's just asked this. Are the trains real? Because they are magnificent.
So yes and no. Each train is based on a real train. So, for example, the Highland Falcon is based on the Mallard, and it's a real type of locomotive. The A4 Pacific holds the land speed record. It's the fastest steam train, and you can go to the Railway Museum in York and see the Mallard. And Sam took me, and I was bowled over. It's an incredible machine. But obviously, we wanted the freedom of fiction, so the Highland Falcon itself doesn't exist. So we know that the royal family does have a private train. So we thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we could take something as iconic as the A4, pretend that the royal family have their own A4? What would it be called? And most of these locomotives were named after birds. We knew we wanted to go all the way to Balmoral. We wanted to go to Scotland. So we wanted a Highland bird, and then falcons are the fastest birds. So we were like, oh, the Highland falcon, that would be a great name for. So there's a fictional element based on a real train. And it's the same with the California Comet. In America, the train that you would immediately identify as the comet is called the California Zephyr. But again, we don't want to name it after the real trains because we do fictionalize it. The train in this is an amalgamation of the Blue Train, which is a very famous South African prestige kind of posh luxury tourist experience, and a company called Rovos Rail, who also run similarly they're like luxury hotels on wheels that tour through the amazing landscape of Africa. So we amalgamated the two, but we really wanted a steam locomotive in this one to add to the drama and the tension. It's a diesel electric in the second book. So there is a train called the Pride of Africa, which Rovos Rail owns, that we based the Safari Star on. However, sadly, the big problem with steam engines is that they need to refill with water and coal regularly. And when you're going through large swathes of African landscape, there is an absence of water in some parts. So it used to be that you could travel the route that we are traveling in the book entirely by steam. But the fewer steam trains there are, the less people are encouraged to keep open the water and coal refuels. So it's no longer possible to do the entire journey via steam. And that's where fiction comes in handy, because it means that we can have those fictional moments and use them dramatically to tell a good story. So we have bent the truth, but there is a small essay at the end of each of these, just a page long, that tells you the true facts about the train we've based the adventures on.
Every time I speak to you, and I think we've chatted over the years as various different parts of your writing and your books have been published, and I'm always just amazed at what a complete sponge you are for absorbing so much information about the subjects that you're writing about and the level of detail that you research. And then not only do you research it and write about it, but you actually kind of, soak it up into your DNA so that you're able to chat seamlessly. So it's part of the writing process for you as an author. Is it the excitement of learning completely new things for you?
Yes. And the joy with this series has been, I've fallen in love with trains. Like at the outset, I really did think, well, I'm the Beetle lady. That's what I love. And I could learn about Beetles every day for the rest of my life, and I would still not know all there is to know about Beetles. It's such an incredible subject. I thought when I started working with Sam, well, he's the train guy, and that's cool. And I don't need to like trains and know everything about trains, because that's what the partnership's about. But I mean, he's a very knowledgeable and passionate advocate for rail transport. And he knows, so he's fascinating, and his passion is infectious. And when he first took me to the Railway Museum in York, I was like this grumpy kid, like, oh, do I have to go to a railway museum really to see trains? It's gonna be so boring. I can still remember the overwhelming experience of emotion I felt going there. It's an incredible museum. It never really occurred to me that one of the most impressive things about railways is just the human inventiveness of these incredible, huge machines designed by human beings that have changed society throughout history and connected people. It was like just an opening flower. And with each new book, I get to learn about the geography of a country. I get to learn about the culture of that country. I get to learn about a new train. And I am very quickly becoming a real train nerd. Like when this lockdown ends and life is restored, I really want to do some amazing journeys on trains. That's my plan. All of the holidays I'm planning are all very train based.
Well, the trains, obviously, as Toby picked up, are very important characters in their own right. But the central character to all the stories is a young boy called Hal. can you tell us a little bit about Hal and kind of where he came from your imagination as a character? Is he related to your son a little bit? Is that, you know, how did he come about?
We always joke, Sam and I, that in our writing relationship, he is Uncle Nat because he knows all about trains and the routes, and I am Hal because I have the childish enthusiasm and the kind of wide-eyed wonder at what I'm learning, and that's how we kind of come together in the stories. But Hal, for me, as I said earlier, my sons don't relate to literary children in kids' books. And there are loads of wonderful books that celebrate like previous stories and children who love reading and the power of reading, which I totally believe in. But if you're not a natural reader, you're not going to relate to those characters. And all of my books are designed to try and entice children into discovering, oh, they do really love reading. So I wanted Hal to not be clever in a literary sense, and every detective, and Hal is a great detective, needs a kind of skill, a unique way of seeing things that gives them an edge, that helps them see clues where people don't, that helps them piece puzzle pieces together. And both my boys really explored the world through drawing. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say they were artists, but the absolute joy of creating comics, telling stories through images, through expressing themselves with pictures. Like every drawer in my house is stuffed with pictures that my sons have drawn over the years. And so I thought, you know, all children really enjoy drawing, whether they're good at it or not. And by observing the natural world and drawing it, you learn about it and you understand it better. It's almost like this process of creating the shape with the hand puts something into your mind. And I thought, oh, imagine if Hal, our detective, just draws pictures and in drawing has this insight, sees things clearly by just taking that little step outside the flow of a life, slowing down, noticing things. That's his superpower, is literally just noticing and drawing and putting it down on paper. And I felt that there isn't a child who couldn't relate to that. And I do think the power of drawing and art is a very important thing for children to, you know, embrace and express themselves with. So I was like, that is good. And then I thought someone must have done that before. There must be an artist detective, a drawing detective. And I couldn't find one. So I was like, oh, yes, because it gives us an excuse to have wonderful illustrations. And Elisa Paganelli, who does all Hal's drawings in these books, she is amazing at capturing the way that Hal sees the world. And of course, in the drawings, if you read the books and you look into the pictures, you'll spot the clues that Hal also spots that helps him solve the mysteries. So the drawings are very much a part of his character and the narrative. And I think the thing that makes him unique.
And as we were talking, the latest one is Murder on the Safari Star, and that takes us through South Africa. And you're going to read a little bit now from this, aren't you, to give us a taste of the story and the country, and importantly introduce us to Hal, and as you've just said, his great love of drawing and observing.
Yes, so I'm going to read a very short extract. What with it being a murder and all, I can't really read you anything that relates directly to the plot because I don't want to give anything away, and it's a very dramatic plot. So I've picked an extract where he's in the first safari park that the train visits, and he's looking at the animals. So here we go. The jeep rumbled over the lumpy ground towards a wide pool of water, crowded with creatures gathering for a morning drink. A cluster of storks with red and yellow beaks landed with a graceless splash, and a baby elephant, small enough to fit underneath his mother's belly, stumbled into the water, flapping his ears in delight. They stopped about 10 meters away, and Liana switched off the engine. "We can get out if you like. Nothing here will harm you, as long as you are respectful and keep your distance. Stick to the path. Do not walk into the bush." I think I'll stay here, Uncle Nat said. My leg feels a little tender. Following Winston out of the jeep, Hal pointed out a herd of black and white horned animals, part horse, part goat. They were drinking at the water's edge. Sable antelope, Winston whispered. I'm going to get a bit closer. Hal wasn't keen to get too close to the animals, but he wanted a good angle to draw from. He saw a barren tree with a large rock in front of it that he could lean his pad on, and so he headed over to it. He drew the shape of the shimmering watering hole and paused to enjoy the playful games of the monkeys splashing about at the water's edge. His charcoal danced and skipped as he worked to get their outlines. Once he had them, he lifted his binoculars to see their faces more clearly, turning the dial to focus the lenses. He noticed a dark shape in the distance, moving above the savanna grasses. He stepped back from the rock, leaning against the tree trunk as the image came into focus, and he gasped. It was a black rhino, travelling alone on the far side of the watering hole. The rhino's horn was missing. It only had a stump. Hal heard the distant exclamations from the rest of the group as they saw it too. He lowered his binoculars. The rhino was still too far away to have upset the animals, but one or two had lifted their heads, alerted by the sound of its approach. Something touched Hal's right shoulder. He turned his head, and from the corner of his eye, he saw a silvery grey snake's head sliding from the tree trunk onto him, moving towards his neck. With a cold flash of horror, he realised he had disobeyed Liana and strayed from the path. Help! He squeaked, frozen with fear. Uncle Nat! But Uncle Nat was in the jeep and too far away to hear him. And there's Elisa's wonderful drawing of Hal's illustration of the watering hole. I don't know if you can see that there.
It is beautiful, and that's a lovely part to read from, because it also introduces another aspect of this book in particular, which is the endangered rhino, and that is very beautifully woven through the adventure series. That kind of, I suppose, that theme around the importance of protecting our wildlife and the ecology of South Africa. And I'm interested to learn more about whether, as you were setting the story there, you realised that there was quite a lot around that safari life and the importance of that protection of the animals that you wanted to also put into the books.
Yes, I mean, in this book in particular has a lot of animals, but one of the other things, if you're going to write about murder for children, you have to be very sensitive around the theme of death, life, conservation. All feeds in rather beautifully to that if you're going to set something in a wild place. And obviously safari parks are managed by humans, but ultimately the whole purpose of them is that they're millions of acres of wild land, and animals should, live naturally as possible. But other humans, poachers, come and try and take, particularly with rhinos, the horns of rhinos. And so I felt that it would have been remiss not to take the opportunity when writing a book with the theme of death, not to engage with the conservation issues in that part of the world, in South Africa, and the importance our relationship is with animals. We are animals. We forget that we are animals a lot of the time. But we are, we're as mammally as our, monkey friends, and, our relationship with animals is very important to me. But I felt for this book in particular, it was something that we could explore along the theme of murder.
Yeah, and the other element to the stories as well, which I think relates to that, is every train that Hal is journeying on with Uncle Nat. Although he tends to be one of the only children, there is also other children there, usually 1, 2 other kids that he relates to and becomes friends with. But they're interesting because they're kind of local to where you've set the stories. So they're almost like his guides as well. And in this one, it's a young boy called Winston that he becomes friends with. And Winston is a brilliant character because he's able to explain quite a lot about South Africa, about conservation, and his mum obviously is their safari guide. So that peppering of all these other characters throughout the stories, can you talk a little bit about them and where the ideas for each of those comes from?
Yes, so one of the things that we really wanted to do with this series, and we know that there will be at least 6 books in this series, if not more, is we really wanted to celebrate the culture of the places that the routes pass through. And quite often with children's books, you'll get a pair of children or a trio of children that have all the adventures together. And we actually thought the best way to celebrate the cultures and learn about the places that we're visiting is if Hal makes new friends on each adventure. And that's not to say that some friends won't return, because in future books we have plans to bring back certain characters. Each of our children has their own interests, they have their knowledge base, and they really help Hal solve the mysteries, because without their understanding of their own culture, Hal would be at sea. Even when he goes to America and he assumes America is going to be so much like Britain, and he discovers that it's wildly different, and his expectations they make him very homesick, because he thought he was basically going to another type of Britain that he sees in movies. And of course, America has its own cultural history and is a real mix of interesting things that are completely new to Hal. So he really grows with each adventure and each of the friendships that he makes. And one of the things that we also thought right from the outset is, when you go on holiday and you make friends with someone and you're only going to know them for that week or those few days, the intensity of those friendships is so much more than the kids you're friends at school with, because you're going to see them every day for years. But sometimes when you go on holiday, you can not fall in love, but you have this really fiery friendship that matters to you for years. And even if you don't meet ever again, they become important people. So we think of these books as travel fiction for children, because children don't have the autonomy to just book a flight and go wherever they want in the world. And we felt it was very important to have a child from the place that we're visiting speak for their own culture and to enrich Hal's experience of the place that he's visiting.
Yeah, and each of those characters, it's very interesting that you say you've got plans to bring them back, because as a reader, you also fall in love with them as Hal's friends. And that adjustment when I was moving on to each new book of feeling a little bereft that I'd left behind some of those characters, but then have found it such a joy to get to know the new characters in each of the books. And of course, in this book, Winston has a very interesting pet, which relates to the experience that Hal has at the watering hole with the snake coming onto his shoulder. And so where did the idea for Winston's lovely pet come from?
So Winston's pet is called Chipo, and it is a yellow mongoose. And we knew obviously that this was going to be a safari book. And what happens at the beginning when we plot our stories is Sam and I get together and we basically have all the ideas. We just have an afternoon or an evening and sometimes a whole day where we just go, oh, what if, or what if this, or what if that? And we just put every idea onto Post-it notes and we stick them on a wall. And it becomes very obvious, which of the ideas are strongest. And we knew that we wanted Winston to have some kind of an animal companion. We couldn't quite work out what would be best, what would work on a train. You know, it obviously couldn't be too big, but we didn't want, you know, anything that was too similar to previous stories either. We wanted it to be unique. And we came up with a selection of animals. But the thing about the mongoose was they are cute. They're very like meerkats. They're related, a distant relative to meerkats. But they also have like this edge because they can really fight. Like, you know, there are very few things that, you know, can deal with snakes. And I think eagles can deal with snakes. But mongooses can also deal with snakes. And the more we learnt about the mongoose, we were like, no, they're really interesting creatures. Don't think this has been done before. We're always trying to look for something new. And then I went to the Cotswold Animal Park. This is obviously a few years ago now, and we could do that. And they had a pair of yellow mongooses. I don't know what the plural is. And they were amazing. I watched them for hours and I was like, oh, yes, definitely. This is going to really work. And the more you research, sometimes you have an idea, you start researching about the creature or the idea, and you realize it's not going to work and you throw it in the bin. But the more we discovered about yellow mongoose, we were like, yes, Chipo is definitely going to be a mongoose. And that's how we chose him, really.
I love Chipo. I love the character Rikki Tikki Tavi as well. So I just think, you know, being protected by a mongoose would be a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, and they're family creatures. That's the other thing, is they, you know, they have their little packs, and they're very so like Chipo thinks of Winston and Liana as like his pack, you know, and that's another nice thing, that family element, I think.
Yeah. You've kind of given a little bit of an answer to these questions that are popping up from the audience. But I'm just going to combine a couple from Megan, who's 8, and Emily, who's 10. So Megan was asking if you know which trains and where you're thinking about setting future books. And Emily also clearly has an affinity with Lenny, who appears in book 1, and is wondering if she's going to make a comeback. I love Lenny. I'd support a comeback, Emily, along with you. Are you able to give us any of those clues?
Well, hello, Megan, and hello, Emily. So it's very difficult to talk about these things without giving everything away. But before Macmillan decided to publish the series, Sam and I had sat down and outlined 10 adventures on trains, because Sam just had this incredible list of amazing train journeys. And so we went through each one and worked out whether we thought we could build a story around it. And we worked out, because with these books, there's a unique train, a unique place, a unique mystery. And we want each of the mysteries to be different. And so some places naturally suggest what kind of a mystery would work. And so we outlined 10, and we knew that Lenny would be in our first book. And if we have our way, she will return for, it'll either be book 7 or book 8. And I can't really say anything about it because Macmillan haven't committed to publish it yet. It would have been our book 5 or 6, but because of the pandemic, we feel very strongly that to write this book, we need to visit the country it's set in and do some actual ground research. We've had to reshuffle the order of adventures because the next 2 we are able to write in lockdown without going to the place. It's not a secret that book 5 is going to be set in Australia. Sam has been to Australia and travelled the trains, and we can write about Australia with some knowledge and authenticity. So we hope Lenny will be in at least one more story where it'll be Hal and Lenny, one story where it'll be a group of children, one of which will be Lenny, and fingers crossed, a short story that we hope will be made available. So she'll be in at least another 3. She is our favourite also, and she's Hal's best friend, and she's a very important character to him because, you know, right at the beginning of the first book, Hal, like me when I went to the Railway Museum, Hal thought trains were just boring machines that took you from one place to another. And that's why we say I'm Hal, because he's now like me and obsessed and, you know, got the bug.
That kind of answers Catherine, who's 8, and she's in Aberdeen. It kind of answers your question, Catherine, because she had asked, have you been to all the places where the stories are set? So it sounds like between you and Sam, you pretty much have covered most of those places.
Well, yes and no. So Sam went and travelled on the California Zephyr. So he did that whole route. So that way he did amazing research and took lots of pictures, and so he's done that. I've never done that route. The Highland Falcons route is fictional, but Sam and I have travelled on enough trains in the UK and been to enough places to know that we can write that with real authority, and that was why it was our first book. Neither of us has ever been to South Africa. However, Macmillan has a sister company in South Africa, and when we started writing this book, we worked with a South African editor to make sure that at all times we are, writing truthfully about the place. So we watch a lot of documentaries, we read a lot of books, and of course there's the internet, which is very useful. But nothing really beats talking. I've interviewed quite a few people who've done the Blue Train route and travelled that route. So I've got first-hand experience, although it's not mine for that one. We would have loved to do the route, but the cost of the train tickets to do the Blue Train or the Brovos Rail, I mean, it's the cost of a car. So we couldn't do that route, sadly. The next one, which comes out in September, Danger and Dead Man's Pass, takes us right across Europe. It's a real love song to Europe, and it ends in Germany at the top of the Harz Mountains, Brocken Mountain in the Harz mountain range. And we did that route together January last year. We took the Eurostar to Paris and the overnight sleeper train to Berlin, and we took the train out to Wernigerode and the steam train right up to the top of the mountain. So we've done that whole route for book 4. Where possible, we would really like to have done the route, because I feel like it really adds something to the story that, we can be very confident about the way we're describing landscape. Safari Star's the first one where neither of us has been to the country, but we had to have like sensitivity reads and someone helping us from that place. I think that's very important, because we don't want to misrepresent. The idea is the books celebrate, and we don't want to accidentally, stomp all over and get things wrong, because that's not our intention. So,
and that's interesting that you said the cost of the ticket was the cost of a car, because yes, of course Hal is able to journey on these trains, and they are quite exclusive and really quite special journeys. But Hal is on the journey because he's there with Nat, his uncle, who is a journalist, and so he's there working. He's been able to be on these trains because it's part of his job. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship and that extra special way that Hal is kind of on board those trains, and therefore some of the other passengers and the different walks of life they're all coming from?
Yeah, we have so much fun. We call it casting when we're casting our books, because we talk about the kinds of characters that we think would be the most fun to encounter. And so obviously we want a big, diverse range of people. And I mean, it should be said, the California Zephyr is not an expensive or fancy train ticket. Americans travel that route as opposed to flying. But this one, the Safari Star, is a fancy train ticket. So we had to really think about what kind of passengers would be on this train. And so we have my favorite character, I have to say, is a detective novelist called Beryl Brash, who is a kind of combination of Murder, She Wrote's Angela Lansbury, who writes, and so she kind of writes romantic murder fiction that's very like cozy crime. And she herself, we base quite closely on Miriam Margolyes, who is just a wonderfully eccentric actor who most children will know from her role as Professor Flitwick in the Harry Potter movies. She's just one of those force of nature people who's unapologetically herself and therefore just wonderful to write. But also we have to have characters that you won't like and that you don't like. So we have to have people, there's a chap on the train called Mervyn Crosby, who is a media mogul and he likes to hunt animals, and he's a character that children will not warm to, and we did not warm to either. But it's also fun to write those people, because those people exist. So we've got everything from a retired detective who's just left the police force, who just wants a quiet life. We've got the crazy and exuberant novelist on the safari train. We've got the media mogul. We've got a very handsome South African soap actor called Patrice, who's just beautiful and brooding and moody. But every single character on this journey has a motive for murder. There isn't one character that you would think, oh, it can't be them. Everybody could have done it. And that's one of the joys of a murder mystery, is trying to piece the puzzle together through all of the things that you learn about the characters as you go. I think for me, mystery stories are very, very much about characters and character relationships, because you're trying to work out motive and why someone might do something as extreme as kill a person. What might drive them to it. So yeah, the characters are always key, but we love to cast our books that they are so much fun.
Well, that probably relates a little bit to Alfie's question, because Alfie wants to know, are any of your characters based on somebody you know in real life? So it sounds like maybe not based, but you've borrowed elements of people you know in real life.
Yes. Hi, Alfie. Well, one of the things that we do, because we write a story together, what we really don't want is me to be imagining one character to be a certain way and Sam to be imagining the same character to be totally different, because that would really upset the apple cart as we wrote together. So what we do is, once we know like who our characters are broadly, where in the world they're from, what their jobs might be, what their age is, like what their life experience is, we then pretend that we're a Hollywood studio and we talk about who our dream casting would be. So in the first book, in The Highland Falcon, there's an actress called Sierra Knight. She's very glamorous. And so when we were deciding what kind of a Hollywood actress she'd be, we kind of mixed and matched certain existing Hollywood actresses. So we had this image of a very Catherine Zeta-Jones, long dark hair, very glamorous. Then we had the Sienna Miller type, kind of very fashionable and very now. And then we have the Scouse element, which I forgot the name of, which is Jodie from All About Eve, that when she's acting, she just sounds so RP, and then she talks to you naturally and she's full Scouse. And so we kind of mix and match, and we have a Pinterest board so that when we're writing a scene and we want to remember what that character's like, we go to the Pinterest board and we see this selection of images of Catherine Zeta-Jones and Jodie and Sienna, and then we can create that character from a mix. So like in California Comet, there is a character that we knew immediately was going to be like Nicolas Cage, for example. So we use a lot of famous actors to help us tell the story, because we're doing it together. So we have to have a visual reference. So yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. I love the fact you've got a Pinterest board, which kind of is a collage of all the amalgamations of your characters. There's another question which is really interesting as well, and it's from someone who's not put their name but is a grown-up who loves reading your stories, and they would like to know, how do you get into the mind of a young child?
Okay, this is confession time. I am about 12. Externally, very old. Internally, about 12. I realized this when I started writing the Beetle Boy books, because like I find scatology, or poo for the children watching, very funny. And obviously beetles and poo, they go together hand in hand, dung beetles obviously being the obvious example. And I feel extreme joy and really get into the mindset of 12-year-olds, really. And I think I've always been 12. I've always felt that way. I know that the body ages, but I read middle grade fiction for pleasure. Always have done. My favorite books are the books that I read when I was about 12. They're the ones that had a real impact on me, the stories that I enjoy, the world that I like to create. I also have children, and I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of really great children's writers out there who don't have children, are younger, in their 20s, and writing stories from their memory of being a child. But I read to my children every day. Well, not the teenager anymore. He won't let me. But my 7-year-old and I, we read every night a couple of chapters. And he is my barometer of what's boring, because children have very short attention spans. And I will often read him something that I think is great, and he will just not engage. And so I feel right now I'm really on my game when it comes to creating stories for children, because I read to my children every day. So I know the things that don't impress them. I know the things that they love. I know the things they find interesting. Quite often editors will tell me that adult relationships aren't interesting to children, but it's not true. Only certain adult relationships aren't interesting to children. Children often want to know cause and effect and consequences, and what makes someone angry or what makes someone guilty. They are very interested in those things, which I think these stories can really explore. But yeah, I am about 12. I'm terribly childish. I have no intention on ever writing a grown-up book, because this is me. It's my voice.
Well, I'm quite relieved that you're going to stick with writing these books, because as a reader, I love them. We've talked a little bit around how you put together your imaging of characters with Sam. But Ethan has asked about why Chipo is called Chipo. So I'm wondering how you then select the names for characters, and what you do very beautifully is choose names which, for me as a Scottish reader, sound terribly exotic, but that's because they are very culturally specific names. So I guess, with Chipo, does Chipo mean something within the South African language and culture? Where do the names come from for each of these characters?
Yeah, so some characters' names just suggest themselves. So, for example, the Hollywood actress, Sierra Knight, Sierra is a mixture of a whole variety of existing Hollywood names. Sierra is a car. It's not actually a very glamorous car, but it's a very glamorous sounding name. And Knight with a K, obviously, again, gives status, but actually, it's also not her real name. So I think name comes from character. And then character solidifies name. So we knew we were going to have a yellow mongoose before it was called Chipo, and we did go through a variety of names. We tried giving it like human name, as it were, like a pet, like you might call your dog Ben or Rover or something. And we found, obviously, we're English. We were naming the pet with English names, and so we were like, well, this is obviously a South African boy is not going to name his mongoose after an English person's name. That's weird. So we started researching, and this is where the internet comes into play very handily, like, common pet names in South Africa. Obviously we wanted it to be something that was appropriate to the cultural background of Winston's character, and then quite often, and I found this with the Beatles as well, you try out a couple in the context of a chapter, and something that you think in your brain, oh, that's a cool name, that's going to work, doesn't. But Chipo is, as a word, like, it just it works as to call an animal, as suggestive of character. It's quite it's cute, but it's got an edge. It's not fluffy and soft. And so yeah, each of our, like Beryl Brash is our novelist, and she is brash, but actually the thing about Beryl is you make an assumption when you first meet her that she's a certain type of character. And then actually as the book progresses, your assumption kind of shames you a little, because she's one of the nicest, cleverest characters actually on the train, but she's very easily dismissed for a whole number of reasons. And so we do like to play a bit with audience expectation, and names are a great way of doing that. I love coming up with names. There are, like, for our two central characters in the whole series, obviously Harrison Beck and Nathaniel Bradshaw. For those who know, and there are those who really do know, Bradshaw's guide was the original train guide to all of the UK routes. It's very famous. There's a whole TV series that Michael Portillo does on Bradshaw's guide. He carries his Bradshaw's guide with him to every station. And so it's a real nod to the history of trains in Nat's name. But Harrison Beck, I've done a lot of school tours over the years, and I met a lot of children when I was dedicating books called Harrison. And I was really surprised, because it was a name that I'd not encountered before I started doing school tours. And I used to ask the children, Harrison, that's interesting. Where's that name from? And a large percentage of them said, my dad loves Star Wars. And that's my generation. I loved Star Wars too. And I realized, of course, Harrison Ford, that's the name. And so when I started talking to Sam about what our detective should be called, I said, you know what, a really interesting name that I keep encountering is Harrison. And we wanted a name that was reminiscent of the type of child he was. So we did this amalgamation thing, because Sam said that the chap who designed the first London tube map that is now iconic and famous, his name was Harry Beck. And so I was like, well, how about Harrison Beck? And what we really wanted was a name that sounded like a train. And the thing is, if you say Harrison Beck, Harrison Beck, Harrison Beck, Harrison Beck, Harrison Beck, it sounds like the movement of a train. And so we were like, oh, that's the name. And we can shorten it to Hal, because everyone does shorten, names. So he's Harrison, but he's Hal Beck. And it's got all of those links that only we know about, unless we do an interview like this. But every name has more than one layer, little onions they are.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love how quite a simple question then has such a huge answer behind it. And it's such a joy and a privilege, I think, to be able to get these insights, deep insights into the whole process that authors go through when imagining their character and their stories and their settings. I think we've probably only got time for one more very quick question, but I'm going to push two together because they're both about favorite things. So Sam, who's 10, wants to know about your favorite book from when you were a child. And Leela, who is quite insistent, I'm loving the way you've typed this, Leela. Leela asks, which train journey that you have been on has been your favorite? So favorite book, favorite train journey. Okay,
so when I was little, I had, it depended on what day it was, I had a couple of favorite books, to be honest. The Twits by Roald Dahl still is one of my favorite books. The concept of two people who despise one another having to live with one another, I found just fascinating and hilarious. And the horrible tricks that they play on one another. The grown-ups can be really mean, and I really loved the truth in that. My parents got divorced, and for many years they lived together, and they did not like one another, and I always used to think of them as the Twits. But so I really loved that book, and it just made me belly laugh, and I love a book that will make me laugh. And my favorite train journey that I've ever done actually is what book 4 is based on, because Sam is my writing partner, is the train schedule guy, and he was like, oh, there's this train that we're going to do the train ride at the top of the German mountain, and I was like, yeah, and I didn't really think of the journey to get there. But we got up at like 6 a.m. He took me to St Pancras. We got on the Eurostar, and within 24 hours I'd been on 7 different trains. I traveled from England all the way through France. I had lunch in Paris and seen some lovely stuff, and then I'd gone all the way overnight to Berlin. I woke up and it was 8 a.m. as we were entering Berlin. Had an extraordinary day in Berlin and got on a train to Wernigerode, and I'd never been to Saxony, Germany. I didn't know anything about it. And then to arrive in Wernigerode and find this incredible steam locomotive train that was going to take me to the top of this mountain on a narrow gauge. It was just the most incredible journey. And I think will probably live with me forever. It's really opened my eyes to what's possible. I obviously am very interested in ecology and saving the environment in the best ways that we can. And travel by train rather than airplane is not only joyous, but it is the best way to help reduce our emissions. So yeah. Go from London all the way to the top of a mountain in Germany. It's the most incredible experience. I heartily recommend it.
Oh, wouldn't that just be the best thing? I would just happily get the train to Glasgow at this point.
Yeah, right now, anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. But Leela, thank you for that question, because that was a brilliant way, I think, to have to end what has been just a delightful morning spent traveling around the world on trains. So thank you, Maya, for telling us so much about the stories, the characters, the writing process, and the train journey that's coming next. Now, if everyone out there, if you would like to get your hands on one of the books and take your imagination on a beautiful journey somewhere else, then you can go to waterstones.com, who are the book sales partner for Granite Noir. You can follow the links from this website. And also you can look at this event again, any of the other Granite Noir events. They will be available on demand, online, completely free of charge. And so if you did want to support the festival, support Aberdeen Performing Arts, then do click on the donate button and give a little to support the ongoing work of this brilliant Granite Noir Festival. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you, MG Leonard, for taking us on a wonderful flight of fancy and imagination. And thank you, everyone, for watching and these really brilliant questions. So big round of applause to all of you. And thank you, MG Leonard.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.